from the beginning, I felt the need to nurture my seeds as they grew in my tummy. I doubled my intake of strength, made sure to take my daily vitamin of faith. Through me, they were receiving their first taste of life, so I was careful to only consume things that were right. And the moment that they entered the world, I fed them double bottles of love. And as they grew, I spoon-fed them trust. I kept them close in the early years, wiping their mouths as they purged up their fears. I filled them back up with persistence and contentment, and they grew from infants to tiny children. My mental feedings consisted of creativity with a side of beauty and a helping of unity. They were born royalty, so I fed them like queens. I was scared that someone would try to feed them pieces of negativity, so I made them eat extra pieces of peace after I hand-picked out the contamination of greed. And they grew, got bigger, much quicker. Sometimes I had to mix up a stew that was thicker, had to make sure it would stick to their ribs. Sometimes I had to force feed my kids confident soup. Ingredients would include beauty, bravery, and gratitude. And I'd whip up discipline with forgiveness mixed in. Bake a bread of patience and butter it with focus. I fed my kids healthy to fill them up with kindness, patience, wisdom, and more love. I baked them desserts mixed with compassion and hope. I wanted them full with all the nutrients needed to cope, and they loved my pie filled with humbleness inside. But just before I laid them down to rest, I made sure they had their taste of perseverance and silence, and my self-grown metaphorical herbs as I softly spoke over and over the same words. You can be anything you want to be. You can be anything you want to be. I seasoned their dreams with belief. So when they'd wake up, they believe dreams don't just take place in your sleep. They are within your reach. And they'd wake up thirsty, so I had to let them sip on reality. Had to let them know that bad things are supposed to happen. But just in case from somewhere they got a taste of hate, I kept a laxative of understanding close by to minimize the pain. So I've always been a dreamer. It's pretty easy for me to do. I don't think that I realized that daydreaming, losing myself in books, or writing for hours and hours was a response to trauma. I didn't realize that until 17 years old. I was a foster care student, in foster care, and I had my oldest daughter, and while I was in foster care. So we were both wards of the state. I didn't have an identity. I liked to write. I could dream. I always knew that there was something big on the inside of me. I woke up 25, 5 children, 4 different fathers, 4 of them all in prison all at the same time. At one point in time, homeless, disturbed, traumatized, hurt, unheard, broken, and frustrated. But there was something deep down on the inside of me. And I kept responding when I was triggered. And I kept responding with the only thing that trauma trained me to do, retreat. I've always been a dreamer. I could get lost easy. I could be standing right here in front of you. I'm here right now, you guys. I'm present. But just so you know, I could be standing in front of you. I could be on the phone with you and not even be there. Very gifted that I could jump back in the conversation as if I was listening. Just gone. Moments just gone. And I'm going to rush through this because this is how my life felt to me. It felt like things were just rushed. I felt like I just woke up and here I am. I'd go to sleep and I'd wake up and here I am in another situation. It seemed like no matter how hard I tried to be the light, no matter how much I poured into my children, no matter how much all hell continued to break loose, and I kept responding the only way I knew how to, the way that trauma had trained me. I retreat. I check out. I get low. But you have 4 daughters, and all of y'all are scared of everything. Everything. Somebody had to be brave. So I had to go from being a dreamer to a doer. I had to figure it out because I had these little people that were looking at me to be an example. And I had taught them how to love education. I had taught them how to be quiet in the library because I love to read. And if you got 4 daughters, and I don't know if you've met my daughters, but their personalities are huge. And if you got 4 daughters that are constantly talking, the best place to take them is to the library. I taught them how to love to read too, so that I can continue to escape. I realized that I needed to show them how to go from being a dreamer to a doer, how to confront this conflict that was within. And the conflict that was within, I was conflicted with who trauma trained me to be and who God created me to be. And it was an issue. It was a real battle going on inside. A lot of times people would misunderstand the look on my face, not realizing that I was fighting literal hell to be present, because I could check out. I could say nothing. I've always been a dreamer. Needing to instill into my daughters the importance of being able to advocate for yourself, to be able to speak for yourself, to be able to love yourself. How could I do that? How could I possibly mentally feed them specific things that I myself, I had no idea. There's parts of my life that I do not remember. I don't remember. I think that's my hair, you guys, I'm sorry. There's parts of my life that I do not remember. I believe that trauma trained me to pack it up, put it in a box, and store it away so that I could show back up, whether it was for my children or for the people in my life, my siblings. I needed to show back up. And so I packed things away. I stored them away. I got lost, and I just kept pouring into them. I had no idea who I was. No idea. No idea what my favorite color was. I had no idea what I liked to do. I had no idea. I had no identity. A ward of the state until 18 years old. And that was the only identity that I had been left with these 4 little girls, and something had to shift. So I started hosting and producing open mics. And I'll tell you, the first time that I hosted, I sat behind the DJ, and I read the poem, and I was shaking, literally shaking, crying, shaking. I did not want to do it. However, I needed to show my daughters that there was something that was bigger on the inside of all of us, and if I would go first, they could follow. So I went from hosting open mics to teaching workshops to volunteering. The more it hurt, the more I served. The more all hell broke loose, the more I served. Because what do you do whenever you're going through so much? You now have teenage daughters. You're now back in your hometown where you were born and raised. Your family is still there, and nobody's understanding the pain on the inside. What do? The more it hurt, the more I served. But guess what? The more I served, the more I learned. The more I showed up, the more I learned the importance and the power in being present and being on purpose. I learned that from serving. So I became a community mediator. It was one of the best things that happened to my life. I remember the position not being something that I would want to do. Who wants to sit in between conflict for a living when you've been trained by trauma to check out the moment conflict is happening, unless it was time to fight? Unless it was time to fight. So how could I possibly sit in between somebody else's conflict, hear and understand them, and then walk away and still feel whole? How was I going to be able to do that? I tell you, it took a lot of practice. It also took therapy. Therapy is important. No matter how much you are trained, no matter how much you are taught, if you don't begin to process what has happened to you, it will just be tucked away. It will be tucked away somewhere. I came home the day after that I got elected, and my best friend had sent me flowers. I hated flowers. I thought I hated flowers. She sent me flowers, and I smelled them, and I was like, oh my gosh. It reminded me of a time that I was in an infant maternity home. It reminded me of that moment, and that's another thing that being traumatized will do. Certain smells, certain sounds will take you back to a place. This was a place that reminded me of where I got the essence and the seeds to mentally be able to feed my children. And so I stand before you today as a dreamer, a doer, and an encourager. I stand before you today as a poet, a grandmother, and a nan. Also, a politician. Where in the world, I never imagined that I would be into politics. I never imagined being standing here. Actually, I failed public speaking twice at HCC. I never imagined it. But trauma had trained me to trek out when it got hard. And what I realized that I needed to be intentional with my time. I needed to be intentional with my moves. The more uncomfortable it got, the more I showed up. The more it hurt, the more I kept going, the more I loved. And so I just challenge you. I challenge you that if you are trained by trauma, forgive. Forgive like it's a prerequisite for healing. Because the only way that you can be healed and whole is if you forgive. And forgiveness has to happen constantly. Many offenses will come. I tell you, as a politician, in my hometown, born and raised, where every system that was supposed to keep me safe, I was traumatized by. I am constantly triggered and re-traumatized. If you see my face, I'm like this. If I'm stuttering, it's because I'm misfiring. I'm trying to not check out and stay present. I'm attempting to be present and just please remember that. Remember that we all have traumas. We all have been through things. Give each other a little grace. Wait before you run up on somebody and tell them your problems. You have no idea what their battle was the night before. Just pause for a minute. Pause. Because see, sometimes I spend time hiding to escape. The liars, deniers, sideliners, and those aspiring to be the next headliner. I hide deep while they seek. I go deep, so deep the finder would have to dig in their mental just to reach. In this mental game of hide and seek, I lay low, turn off my firefly glow, take a mental rest, lay back, and rehearse how I plan to articulate my most profound words. I let adjectives, adverbs, nouns, and verbs play a part in my poetic verse. Inject a selection of propositions, conjunctions, and interjections in just the right place for verbal perfection. Then I come out and re-say in a different way what I wanted to say, like, hey, yo, Hagerstown women, I'm right here. I'm on your side like we Siamese. It's time to reveal the real, remove the mask, no more boundaries. I write to get closer to me, poetic proximity. I write to get closer to you, and you can always keep your sympathy. Because I'll put you poetically in God's garden of words and make you peep his scenery. Take this glass filled with my lyrical symphony, hope it contagiously tickle your fancy. And you get addicted like my addiction to my pens. Get right within. Poetry is my breath, and I don't waste it on frivolous debating. So when I'm not speaking, it's always just another breath waiting. Trained by trauma, forgive and heal. Thank you.